So we are thrilled to have Shawnlei Breeding as tonight's featured presenter. After receiving a BS in zoology from the University of Oklahoma, Shawnlei worked for nonprofits for a while until her passion, which was to work directly with animals, called to her. She started working with Brevard Zoo in 2003, and then spent nearly 12 years working at Disney's Animal Kingdom, managing their African and Asian avian off-show breeding facility and training cast members in animal husbandry protocols. In 2016, just a year after she received her master's in conservation biology from the University of Central Florida, she joined Audubon, Florida as their EagleWatch program manager. As EagleWatch coordinator, Shawnlei recruits, oversees, and trains over 600 citizen scientists to monitor more than 600 bald eagle nests across the state of Florida and collect data on nesting success. Palm Beach County participates in EagleWatch and currently has approximately 22 active and inactive nests being monitored by our hardworking EagleWatch volunteers led by coordinator Linda McCandless. There are also additional nests in Corbett and Dupuy management areas monitored by FWC, and nests Dr. Mark Cook monitors by helicopter in the South Florida Water Management District areas. Among her many other responsibilities, Shawnlei also liaises with state and federal agencies, personnel to protect bald eagles, promote best management practices, and help ensure compliance with state and federal permits regarding eagle management in Florida. In her spare time, she enjoys being outdoors, listening to live music, and spending time with her husband, Steve, and their 3 rescue cats. Here to present on EagleWatch, Protecting Bald Eagles in Florida, is Shawnlei Breeding. Shawnlei, you can now share your screen and take it away. If you have questions for Shawnlei, please place them into the chat.
Hello, thank you so much for having me tonight. It's been fun seeing all of the names rolling through that have joined the meeting. There are a lot of you that I know from EagleWatch. So shout out to the fabulous EagleWatch volunteers from Palm Beach County. I think we have around 33 active volunteers in that area who monitor those nests. And Linda for all of her hard work, being the local point of contact for the volunteers for questions and helping me manage the ever-growing group of volunteers around the state and the number of nests that we monitor. So her help is really invaluable, and she does amazing things. Helping to document when we find new nests, make sure they're active eagle nests and so on. So again, shout out to all of you all for your hard work down there. And some of this will probably be familiar for a number of you, but we'll try to keep it interesting and get through this information, and hopefully you'll learn something fun and new. So I usually like to start off with a little bit of just background or refresher on eagle biology and nesting biology and so on. Just some fun facts about bald eagles you might not have known. Maybe some fun things you can take into trivia or impress your friends with, or just think about next time you see an amazing bald eagle. They're always so majestic when you see them in the wild. I feel like I see them all the time. I see them up close, but anytime I see one in the wild, I still get excited like a little girl. They're just so amazing to watch in flight. So very, very happy that you all got to see some on your Christmas bird counts as well. But the bald eagle is a very large bird. If you've seen one in the wild, you are aware of that, obviously. They actually weigh probably less than you think they might, as all birds do. They have hollow bones, and so they actually weigh less than you might think. So female bald eagles generally weigh 10 to 12 pounds in Florida, and male bald eagles weigh maybe 6 to 8 pounds. And this is true for all birds of prey. The females are larger. So just another fun fact about bald eagles, the females are definitely larger. And bald eagles are only found in North America. So if you travel anywhere else, you won't find the species anywhere else. And that's one of the reasons they're so near and dear to our heart as our national symbol, the bird that represents our country. So they are native just to North America. They can live quite a while. The oldest in the wild was 37 or 38. And they know that because the bird was banded in the nest as a chick as part of a research study. And then years later, unfortunately, was struck and killed by a car. And when they recovered the body for proper disposal, they noticed the leg band, and they could trace it back through the records to see that it was 37 years old. So kind of crazy to see how long they live in the wild just under normal circumstances. But of course, in a zoo or another setting like that, where they have all kinds of health care, and they don't have to worry about food or getting struck by cars. They've had some species live up to 50 years or so, bald eagles in captivity. So can be quite a long-lived bird. And they don't really, you don't have to worry too much about them carrying your little dog away, or maybe your larger dog. Maybe your little dog might be of concern. They usually aren't going to carry anything more than 4 or 5 pounds off. That's not able to lift it and get it away. So, keep your eye on your small dogs, your cats, but if you have larger dogs, generally you should be okay. It's usually only a very emaciated or starving bird that's going to try and take something that it can't carry away, because it's endangering itself when it's doing that. And they are mostly, fish eaters, of course. That's what you see them scooping the fish out of the water, the majestic, beautiful videos and photos you see. But they do eat just about anything with meat. And unfortunately, they are also scavengers, and they will eat roadkill. You'll see them on the side of the road with vultures fighting over carcasses. And this is often when they get into trouble with those car strikes and other issues that come along with foraging on the side of the road. What makes it really easy to be involved in EagleWatch generally is that they do come back to that same nest site year after year. So that's something that makes it easy for us to pretty much know where to find them. They do come back to the same mate. They are considered monogamous. So they will stick together and come back year after year to their nest, work on it together, and raise their family. It takes a lot of energy to defend the territory and get enough food to feed these large babies that grow so fast. And so if you have a good mate that's able to help you do all those things, they really want to stick together. Now, if one of the mates passes, the other mate will usually take a new partner at some point eventually. So, but they generally will keep the same mate as long as they're alive. So that's some of the cool, fun facts about bald eagles. Here's a little diagram to show you the difference in size. It can be challenging if you don't see the birds perched together. If you see a male and female together, it can be more obvious. The larger one is going to be the female, but if you just see a lone eagle perched somewhere, it's hard to say if it might be the male or the female. And what's interesting about our Florida bald eagles is that they are smaller than the eagles up north. And that's a biological mechanism that helps birds and animals up north conserve body heat in the cold winter. And so if you're larger, it's a surface area ratio mechanism that allows you to conserve your heat better. So our eagles are smaller than the eagles up north. And if you've been to Alaska, I'm sure you would agree. You've seen the giant eagles in Alaska, much larger than our eagles here. And also our eagles here breed at a different time of year than the eagles up north. So our nesting season here in Florida runs from October to May. And up north, they might not initiate nesting until later in the spring and go through the summer. And obviously, they're kind of waiting till the snow is starting to melt and they can get enough food to feed their young up north. The winter is not the best time to do that. But here in Florida, winter is a great time to be outside, a great time to raise a family. The water levels are lowering. It's easier to catch fish. All the ducks come down for the winter, all those unique species you saw on your Christmas bird count, and coots and other things that are a main diet source for these birds as they're feeding their young. They may have, they do have a really large nest. Obviously, if you've seen one, it's crazy how big they can get. They will add to it each year. Sometimes it ends up being like a double stack, or sometimes they will actually overwhelm the tree and collapse the tree from the weight. The largest recorded bald eagle nest ever was in St. Petersburg, and it weighed 2 tons when it fell, if you can imagine. So crazy. But they will have usually 1 or 2 alternate nests in their territory, and the territory is the area that they maintain. It's their area where they won't let any other adult bald eagles in, and they may have 1 or 2 nests just to alternate between each year. So that's the only guesswork we sometimes have, is if the eagles don't use the nest that we're used to watching, maybe they've got another one in the area. We just have to figure out where it is. It's usually within half a mile or so of their other nest. But that's always the fun sleuthing we get into, trying to figure out where they've moved to if they're not using the nest that we've been watching anyway. So they are very defensive of their territories. As I mentioned, they do not allow any other adult bald eagles into their territory at all. They will chase them off, and they're very serious about this. In the fall, we get a number of bald eagles that are killed or injured from territory fights, and the injuries can be quite severe. My office is at the Audubon Center for Birds of Prey in Maitland. If you've never been, come visit us. We are a raptor education and rehabilitation facility, and we have resident raptors that couldn't be released that came through our clinic. We get 700 to 800 birds of prey each year coming through our clinic doors to be treated, and about 80 of those are bald eagles, and it always goes in a cycle. In the fall, as nesting season starts back up again, the eagles that come to us are all usually territory fights from adults scrapping over territory and driving other intruders out. So it is quite severe and can be very dangerous. And strangely, also sometimes fighting can also look a little bit like courtship. You see some chasing and flying after, but the cool thing with the eagles when you notice their courtship behavior is when they lock the talons and twirl around, although sometimes they also do that when they're fighting. And sometimes they don't actually let go if they're fighting, which can be, you know, devastating when they hit the ground. Hopefully they both survive and eventually let go and are able to get away. But yeah, the courtship behavior is pretty cool. We see that usually in the fall as well. Eagles coming back, even though they're coming back to their same pair, you've got to keep the romance alive. So they will court each other and, you know, spend time together, preening and, you know, bringing food to each other and, you know, eventually copulating, getting ready to lay their eggs. So when they are ready to lay their eggs, they will usually settle down. The first step is always laying of the eggs. 1 to 4 eggs or so are laid. Generally in Florida, I've really only ever heard of mostly 2 to 3 eggs hatching in a nest. I don't think we've ever had a 4 chick nest in the history in the time that I've been involved anyway, maybe back in the day. But they do lay these eggs every other day, so the female does. And when she lays the first egg, she actually starts incubating right away. So the first egg gets a 1.5 day jump start on development to the second egg, and then so on down to the last egg laid. So the eggs are developing at different rates because they were laid in different orders and they've been developing longer periods of time depending on where they're at in that order. So the first chick that hatches will be substantially larger than the third chick that hatches, for example. And sometimes you do get sibling rivalry where they might outcompete each other for food. But thankfully in Florida, we have a decent food source. And we do have a number of nests every year that fledge 3 young, which is a lot of work for those poor parents. It does take about 35 days for those eggs to start hatching. And, you know, the eggs have to be sat on constantly. They do have to be kept at a very consistent temperature for them to develop properly. And if they are scared off the nest by disturbance or something, if they're off the nest for too long, the eggs will cool and not be viable. So that's always a concern with disturbance or work going on near the nest during that delicate incubation period. And then once the chicks start hatching, usually when the birds are incubating, they lay low in the nest. They're trying to cover all the eggs with their body and make sure the eggs are warm. But once they start hatching, the adult will sit up a little higher in the nest. The male and female do take turns on incubation duty and also on brooding the chicks. The chicks can't regulate their own body temperature for the first week or so, 2 weeks or so. And so there will always be an adult in the nest again, helping those chicks stay dry when it's raining or keeping them warm in the cooler days and so on. And so you'll see those adult behaviors sitting up a little higher, but still in the nest. The other adult will be bringing food in to start feeding the babies. And you'll see the cute bending down, parents tearing food and feeding those unseen chicks that are so tiny, you usually can't see them at this stage. After about 3 or 4 weeks, the chicks can start to regulate their own body temperature and the adults will spend less time on the nest as the chicks grow, and eventually, you know, usually around 4 weeks, if you're lucky, you'll start to see the little bobbleheads poking up above the nest and the adults coming back to feed them. It takes them about, 8 weeks to be considered capable of flight, and they do grow really quickly. At 8 weeks, they could possibly fly, but generally the average fledging age for bald eagle chicks is 10 to 14 weeks. And the adults will be feeding them, dropping food off. The chicks will be learning to feed themselves with the food that the parents drop off. And even after they fledge, they usually stick around for a few weeks with the parents while the parents are teaching them the ropes of how to find their own food and supplementally feeding them until eventually they're ready to head off into the wild blue yonder and start their migration north. Juvenile eagles here in Florida do generally migrate up the Atlantic flyway over the summer. So once they fledge, they'll go up. Some of them go as far as Maine, which is crazy. We know this through satellite tracking studies. And they'll come back to Florida in the fall and roam around and then go back up the Atlantic flyway again over the summer. And they'll do this for a number of years until they reach maturity and they're ready to settle down and have their own family. So it's quite a rough life they sometimes face when they're traveling. They're encountering all kinds of different barriers as they're going up the Atlantic flyway and issues in other states that we've noticed with some of the birds that we've banded and gotten band recite reports from them. But usually once they survive that first year, their survivorship is pretty strong. So that's good news. And so what's really fun too about adult bald eagles, like I said, they won't tolerate those adult bald eagles in their territory, but they will allow juveniles in for a little bit. But once they're ready to really get serious about nesting, sometimes these juveniles try to sneak in and steal a free lunch or whatever, and the adults will drive them away. So you'll might see some juvenile eagles in the territory, but they won't be tolerated for very long once the nesting season gets going. So this is kind of a quick little diagram to show you how they grow. After, when they first hatched, if you watched any of those nest cams, they're a little white fuzzball, super cute and tiny. We just had the Southwest Florida Eagle nest cam hatched one of the chicks. The other egg didn't hatch properly, unfortunately. So you get to see the very early stages of what they look like and how the parents care for them, and it's just adorable. And then after about 10 days, they turn into this gray fuzzy ball. And then after about 3 weeks, they get this cute little white mohawk. And that's usually when you see them above the nest finally. And they continue to shed the white mohawk and grow in their brown feathers over time, to the point that when they're about 8 weeks old, they generally are fully feathered, all brown. They look unlike an adult eagle when they're leaving the nest. So their first flight, this is what the bird looks like. It's all brown. It's got a brown beak. It's got a brown eye. Its legs are still yellow, but everything else is brown. So they sometimes get mistaken for golden eagles, which we don't actually have in the state here. But this is what they look like when they're leaving. Big, beautiful birds taking their first flight and heading north. And then every summer, they will shed their feathers. We call that molting. They'll grow in a new set of feathers, and those new feathers will slowly transition from the brown bird that we knew when it left the nest. Over time, 2.5 years or so, it's kind of got this fun speckled look that you see here. You can also notice that the beak is starting to turn yellow, and that's because the beak grows continuously. It's made of the same thing as your hair and your fingernails. So it transitions from dark brown to yellow as it's growing out, and even their eye lightens, which is really cool. So I call this kind of the awkward teenage phase. You see a lot of these birds hanging out at landfills where there's fast food and easy pickings, so to speak. And then eventually, after about 5 years, they have molted into their full adult plumage, and they have that beautiful white head and tail that we all know and love. And at this stage, they're considered mature and ready to raise a family if they're able to find a territory and a mate. Two barriers to getting started to raising a family, of course. So I hope you enjoyed all those fun facts about bald eagles, maybe learned a few fun things to share with your friends. And we all love bald eagles, of course. It's not easy or hard to get people excited about bald eagles because I think we all have so much nostalgia for them. They're a big, beautiful bird. They represent our country. We've just grown up loving them as, citizens of the United States of America. But I also love them for a conservation reason because, a lot of times with the news and all that's going on, it's easy to get discouraged with the environment and the challenges we see every day and feel like, can we really make a difference? And bald eagles always remind me that when we take steps to protect something, we really can make a difference. And if you're familiar with the story of the bald eagle, back when I was a little girl, they were in danger of disappearing forever. Their population had dwindled to less than 400 nesting pairs in the US. And this was because of human persecution. It wasn't illegal to shoot them back then. You could cut down their nest tree at any time if you wanted to. And also the pesticide DDT, which was affecting the ability of their eggs to hatch properly. And so they weren't really having any young. And anytime you have a population not having young, that is a recipe for disaster. And that's exactly what happened. But in 1973, they passed some laws. They protected the bald eagle on the Endangered Species Act. It was illegal to shoot them anymore. You couldn't cut down their nest tree without a permit, and they banned DDT. And all of these steps together, along with a number of conservation organizations that were doing interesting things like translocations, bringing birds from other states to areas where they had gone extinct, hatching and rearing chicks in captivity and releasing them back into the wild. So many really cool projects. All of this action together made just what was needed for the bald eagles to make a massive comeback. And so by 2007, they actually were considered fully recovered, and they were delisted at that time when the population was up to about 10,000 nesting pairs again. So a great success story. Even looking here in Florida, if you didn't know, we have one of the largest nesting populations of bald eagles outside of Alaska, right here in Florida. So we're very fortunate to live here and see so many eagles, easily. Even here in an urban area where I live, driving down the highway, I see them up on cell towers and so on. We do have quite a number of them, but going back to when they were in danger of going extinct, we were down to less than 80 nesting pairs in Florida. And then over time, with the measures to protect them, they made a full recovery. We were up to about 1,200 nesting pairs in Florida in 2007. And then as time has gone on, the population has continued to recover. Florida Fish and Wildlife no longer does aerial surveys of the state, but a few years ago, U.S. Fish and Wildlife did some targeted aerial surveys. and brought in some eBird data to do some, what do you call it? Not monitoring, but there's a fancy statistical word for it, modeling. That's it, sorry. I ate pie right before this started, and I think the sugar has gone to my brain. But they did some fancy statistical modeling to assume and figure out and determine what the population might be. And looking at just Central and North Florida, they came up with the fancy number of about 2,500 nesting pairs. Not sure why they didn't do South Florida for whatever reason. So likely the number is probably a little higher than this, but that's the good news. Eagles are doing well in our state. And that's what we're all working towards. So they aren't listed on the threatened and endangered species list anymore, but they are still protected by state and federal laws. We have the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and the main one that protects bald eagles is the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act. And that's the one that really has the teeth when it comes to development and other activities going on near an active nest that might cause disturbance. So it's illegal to shoot them, it's illegal to cut down their nest tree without a permit, and it's illegal to disturb the nest to the point that it might fail. If there were young, the young perish in the nest, or the eggs don't hatch because the adults flushed off the nest. This is a federal violation, so it's very serious. If it's proven in a court of law and a person is found guilty, it can be up to $10,000 in penalties and possible jail time. So this is the main one that I work with in Florida in relation to a lot of our eagle nests in urban areas. U.S. Fish and Wildlife came up with some guidelines for work near the nest, and they determined that as long as you keep your work outside of 330 feet from a nest during the nesting season, you're less likely to cause disturbance, unless it's some sort of extremely large destructive, mining or blasting or something like that, that has another buffer of 660 feet. But these are just guidelines, they're not laws. And so the question always comes down to, will the person get a permit if their work is too close? The permit will allow them to do work closer than to the nest than 330 feet. There are a lot of different regulations that go into play, and I work very closely with U.S. Fish and Wildlife to help, make sure that eagle nests are protected, that people are getting the permits if they need them, and working with FWC as law enforcement to come out and sometimes stop the work if it is causing a disturbance and they do not have a permit for that. So that's a big part of what the EagleWatch volunteers do on a daily basis, and we'll talk a bit more about that as we go on. So even though the eagles aren't, the eagles are doing well in our state, as we can see by the numbers, they are not without pressures in our state. We have one of the highest rates of development of states in the US. If you've lived here very long, you've seen the changes, natural areas being converted to, shopping malls and roads and neighborhoods. And so loss of habitat is a growing concern for eagles in Florida as we are, chopping down trees and getting rid of areas where they might nest or where they might forage. And habitat loss isn't just from human interactions from tearing things down, but it is also related to hurricanes. We have a number of hurricanes that wipe out trees, suitable trees in an area for nesting. Pine bark beetle disease is affecting a lot of our tall pine trees that eagles choose to nest in. So there's all kinds of different pressures they're facing for loss of habitat. Environmental toxins and human interface and climate change we'll kind of discuss here as we go along. But one of the other side effects of habitat loss is eagles getting squished into smaller areas to nest. And as I mentioned earlier, being so territorial, they will fight and fight to the death if they have intruders in their area. Thankfully, they are somewhat learning to live amongst each other and close to each other. Back in the day, if you read literature about bald eagle territories, they would say it was 1 to 2 miles around their nest. But EagleWatch has documented eagles nesting less than 1/3 of a mile from each other now. And so thankfully the eagles are, figuring it out. They're in areas where there's a high food availability. And so I guess they're kind of making it work, but it is a concern with eagles being squished into smaller areas, territory fights being on the rise and so on. And it's not just other eagles they have to fight with. If you didn't know, great horned owls are great stealers of bald eagle nests. They don't like to build their own nest, and they use the same type of nest that bald eagles do. So oftentimes they will come in and actually kick the eagles out. And we see this with about 10 to 12 nests every year. Even though they seem smaller, they are very fierce. And so we do lose a small number of nests every year to those great horned owls, especially after hurricanes. The eagles will work so hard to rebuild their nest, and then the great horned owls come in and say, "Thank you very much for building that nest for me," and they take it over. Oftentimes the eagles will just rebuild somewhere else nearby. So that's the good news. Finding that nest is the other issue though. And they also fight with osprey over platform nests. A number of eagles nest on man-made structures now. So there's all kinds of craziness going on. And I actually heard recently about a bald eagle pair that actually took a nest over from a red-tailed hawk. So apparently they're swapping nests now as well, which is interesting. Looking at some of the environmental toxins, anytime you have a bunch of humans around, you can get issues with toxins in the environment. We've had issues with red tide and all of the sewage and waste that's going into the water and affecting the water quality and killing the fish. And of course, that really does present a problem for a species that relies so heavily on waterfowl and fish. But, along with those issues, we do have ongoing problems with lead. So it is illegal to shoot bald eagles. We do still get a few bald eagles that get shot every year. Sorry, my kitty's going to make an appearance, unfortunately, but that's on the lower end of things usually. What happens with the lead poisoning is that the eagles have scavenged or foraged on an animal that's been shot with lead bullets, and they get that secondary toxicity from eating the organs and the intestines that have absorbed all of that lead. And it can be fatal. They will, pass away from that if they don't get treatment. Thankfully, it is usually very treatable. And we do treat that at our lab here at the Center for Birds of Prey quite frequently. Rodenticide is another big issue in urban areas. Eagles will eat those rodents that have eaten the rodenticide, and they get secondary poisoning from that. And as an adult, they can often survive that, but if they take that piece of rat back to the nest and feed it to their small chick with that body size, we have lost chicks in nest confirmed due to rodenticide in the past. So we do a lot of education, and some of our volunteers go out to local businesses near nests and ask them to consider, moving their bait boxes away or not using them during the nesting season to try and make sure that the eagles don't succumb to that fatality. The other really interesting one that I didn't know about until I came to this role is barbiturate poisoning. And this happens with landfills usually, as pets or other animals have been humanely euthanized. When the bodies are taken for disposal, if they go to the landfill, they're supposed to be buried to a certain depth. And if they don't get buried properly, or something happens and they get uncovered, and the eagles will forage on those carcasses and get that toxicity from the barbiturate euthanasia solution, and they will go into a coma and die. And the photos you see here on the left are one of the first birds I experienced this with, and that came through our clinic. It came from a landfill in Osceola County, and the person who rescued it and brought it to us thought it had died on the way, but it was barely still alive. And thankfully, with just some supportive care and flushing to get the toxins out of the system, she made a full recovery. Within a week, she was feisty and ready to go, and we released her back into the wild. So that's the good news, with some of these issues, if we can catch them. But at other times, it may affect their ability to forage properly. Maybe they're in the middle of the road and just not quite with it enough to get out of the way. It can impact so many different variables in their lifestyle and their survivability. Human interface, just living amongst humans. We put a lot of garbage into the environment, unfortunately. We get issues with plastic debris being taken back to the nest that chicks get hung up in. The upper right sad photo was from a cell tower nest where the eagles had taken some sticks back up to the nest that had some mesh netting on it, and one of the young chicks got its leg caught in the mesh, ended up perishing and hanging to death from the cell tower. Thankfully, at the end of the season, we were able to organize with the tower owner to send a crew up to clean all of the plastic netting off that tower so that we wouldn't have that happen again. So unfortunate story for that poor eagle, but it did help us make hopefully a bright future for future eagles that nest there and future families. We also have fishing line issues where fishermen cut the line when they're fishing. And if the eagle takes that fish back up to the nest and it's at the stage where the young chick is learning to tear its own food and eat it, they can get impaled in those fish hooks or swallow them. And this chick in the middle actually had done that, just that. It had a hook that was in its beak and a hook that was in its feet. And it was basically hogtied and was like unable to get itself separated to even be able to eat. And this was a nest that our volunteers monitored, thankfully. So we were able to get permission from Fish and Wildlife to access the nest with the high reach lift and get the chick out, and with a little bit of care for the wounds, it was ready to go back again, and we released it back in the wild with its family once it was flying. And then just vehicle strikes, as I mentioned, that is a very common cause of death, unfortunately, for eagles in Florida, and even eagles that travel out of the state. Some of the eagles that we banned that have perished that we're notified about, a lot of them have been from car strikes up north as they're foraging for food. So any way that we can try to keep our environment clean, think about what you're putting out in the environment. These are all ways that we can help the bald eagles. And that's really the power of community science. The Christmas bird count was like a huge citizen science initiative that started over 100 years ago. And that's really all of us working together to collect the data that helps us understand bird populations. And I can't manage or monitor 1,200 nests around the state, but with 700 volunteers, we can collect the data that helps us keep a finger on the pulse of the population and know how they're doing in our state. We want to make sure that they don't start to decline again and that they're doing well. So we do have about 700 volunteers. Last season, we monitored just over 1,200 nests in 53 counties. And that's a lot of hard work of volunteers going out and visiting their nests, collecting the data, sending it back to the program, to me, and checking to see how the eagles are doing. We are the only ongoing nest monitoring program in Florida right now. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife and Florida Fish and Wildlife rely on our data to help keep a finger on the pulse of that population and make sure they're doing well. This is just a quick overview map to show you generally where we're active. The blue dots represent nests that we monitor, and the green counties are counties where we have active monitoring. Most of our monitoring is in areas where it's easy to see the nest. We can't really go on private property to view nests without permission. So we generally are monitoring nests that are visible in state parks or from a road or in the neighborhood and so on. So there will always be some percentage of the population that we won't be able to monitor just due to their location. But we are expanding every year, growing every year. The program just keeps growing, which is a good problem to have. And our main thing, of course, that we're involved with EagleWatch is monitoring the nest and collecting the data. And that is the key initiative, the key part of what we do. So every volunteer is trained with the protocols and what's expected, and they are assigned a nest to watch. And then they monitor that nest, throughout the nesting season, visiting twice a month through the full nesting season. And the nesting season in Florida, as I mentioned, runs from October to May. And that doesn't mean that a nest will start in October, but they don't fledge young until May. That long stretch of time covers all the different nest initiation dates for eagles in Florida. Some of them start really early. So we had pairs that laid eggs in November that already have chicks. And then some pairs don't get start till March, maybe even April. And so those are the late nesters that probably won't be done until May or sometimes even June. So that range does cover all the different nest initiation timeframes for Florida's eagles because there is so much variety. But as you can see, it does go through a rather regular flow. It starts with courtship and nesturations where they're working on the nest. Then they're laying eggs. You see them incubating the eggs, switching off, taking turns incubating. Then they're brooding the chicks. They're feeding the chicks. The chicks are growing. You're starting to see them. They're getting more active. They're moving around the nest more, and the parents are spending less time there. And then eventually you'll see the eagles start flapping their wings, working up their muscles, practicing. They'll hop up in the air. They'll go out on branches in the tree and then come back to the nest. And finally, they take that first flight out at 10 to 14 weeks of age. And again, stick around for another few weeks with their parents before they get ready to migrate north. The most tricky phase of nesting for my volunteers is incubation. So when an eagle is on the eggs, because they lay so low, we're monitoring the nest from the ground. The nest is high and at a distance. It can be challenging to see that eagle in the nest. And I can't tell you how many times I've had volunteers tell me their nest was inactive. And then one day they went back by after a month or two and saw big chicks sitting up in the nest. So the eagles are extremely sneaky and they will fool you. So I always tell everyone, don't give up, just keep going back. Hopefully they're just low in the nest and you can't quite see what's going on. So that's if you can see in the picture, there is actually a beady little eagle eye poking out through the sticks watching you. But sometimes that's all you get is just a little eyeball through the sticks or maybe a very slim picture of white feathers on the top. And so this is kind of the time right now where we're in incubation. I'm starting to get those emails from volunteers that they think their nest is inactive. So that's why we do ask volunteers to watch the nest through the full season. If you stop monitoring too early, then we won't know, was the nest truly inactive or did you just not see the signs of incubation and so on. But along with, obviously tracking which nests are active and did the eagle show up? Did they lay eggs? Those are very important statistics to track. But the main thing that we really look for is fledging data or productivity. And that really is the number of fledglings per occupied nest. So for every nest that we monitored where eagles made an attempt to actually nest, how many chicks survived fledge? So this number tells us how many birds are being added to the population. And that's the key factor for making sure the population is stable or increasing. And so in my time in this role, it has been fairly stable. As you can see, it's generally, the upper 1.2s, low 1.3 fledglings per occupied nest. 2022, we had quite a dip. That was the year that we had a really bad outbreak of avian influenza. And that caused a number of deaths with eagles in Florida and nest failures because of it, unfortunately. Last year, the numbers were up a little bit, but we started the season with a horrible hurricane that devastated Southwest Florida, and we had a lot of nests down there. And, the tree situation in that area was not always great anyway. A lot of the eagles were nesting in those Australian pines, which are kind of flimsy, but all the trees just got laid waste. There really wasn't even that much left for the eagles to build in. So it was a struggle for that population to rebound last year. So I'll be really curious to see what happens this season. We're about 3 months into the season so far, got a few more months to go. The other thing we look at is fledge rate of the chicks that hatched, how many survived to fledge. And that usually is also fairly consistent, in the low 90%, and that's a good number. This really tells us how successful the eagles are at raising their young. So we like to see that number where it's at. Again, the dip in 2022 with avian influenza, unfortunately, and we are seeing a few cases spike up again in the state. So we're hoping that it's not bad like it was in 2022, but we do track that as well. The other thing that we do is we maintain the statewide nest map. So as volunteers are out monitoring their nests, they're reporting when the nest moves. I get reports from the general public about new nests that haven't been documented. FWC used to maintain the statewide nest map, but they stepped back from doing that a few years ago and transferred that over to the EagleWatch program. And so I get to get all those cool nest reports, assign the nest IDs, and add them to the map. The volunteers have their own password protected map that they can use to review data and look up information. And then we have a very basic public map for outside stakeholders that might need access to information to determine, like, I need to build a house here. Is it going to be impacted by an eagle nest? Or, we want to start a development. What's the area look like? So the public nest map does give very basic information for those agencies to help them make their management decisions. The other thing that EagleWatch volunteers do is identify threats and disturbances. So they're going to be the first to notice when they show up if the land the nest is on has gone for sale, if development is started. Volunteer shows up at the beginning of the season and realizes the whole lot has been cleared directly up to the nest tree without a permit, and we can get Florida Fish and Wildlife involved in some of these cases to make sure that everyone's following the proper procedures and the legal requirements for work near a nest. And I can't tell you how many times volunteers have been key to stopping work near a nest that was causing disturbance and ensuring that the eagles were able to nest successfully that season. They also do a lot of education and advocacy in their community. So going to county commission meetings to speak out against development that's occurring or proposed near active nest. As I said, talking to businesses about rodenticide. A lot of these nests are in neighborhoods or parks, sharing with people their passion for the eagles and, showing them how they can be good stewards of the eagle population, what they can do to try to help them, what are the proper ways to monitor them without disturbing them, all of these different things that EagleWatch volunteers do on a daily basis out there, building fans for eagles and helping people make decisions that are going to benefit them for sure. So our data that we collect is used in so many different ways. As I mentioned, we track population trends to make sure the eagle population is doing well. We also inform permits. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife reaches out to me regularly to ask about nest data and permit, applications they're considering. And we have, companies that are waiting to schedule work until the nest is done. So they contact me for updates on the nest to see how the status is. And then also rescues and releases related to the Center for Birds of Prey. Volunteers may notice that, one of the chicks is missing from the nest and it wasn't quite ready for release or ready to fly. And we can work together to check and see if maybe the chick fell out of the nest and get it rescued, get treatment for it, and then hopefully release it back into the wild. And so, a lot of the eagles that do come to the Center for Birds of Prey are from nests that were associated with EagleWatch or, somehow related to volunteers that were out there and heard about an injured nest or injured eagle. So that's kind of the fun little side part of what we do. But we do partner with a number of agencies because so many people do rely on the data as they're doing their day-to-day jobs. Florida Fish and Wildlife is the law enforcement for the laws that protect bald eagles. We have a number of eagles nesting on cell towers and power line towers and other man-made structures. So we work closely with those power and utility companies and communication companies, DEP and other companies organizations that have nests on their property, making sure that those nests are monitored and safe. And really the common goal for all of us, we have different ways of getting there. And of course, power and utility companies have, their their own desires. They obviously want to balance protecting the eagles and also, maintaining their structures, but we are all working together for that same common goal. And so looking at the nest that EagleWatch monitors, about 20% of them are on these man-made structures now, which is a really interesting trend that we're really only seeing in Florida. I haven't really seen it documented in northern states as much as it is being done here in Florida. So one of the things we look at every year with our data is, how are those eagles doing? Are the eagles nesting on man-made structures doing as well as eagles that are nesting in trees? And the good news is the data we collect indicates that they are doing as well as eagles nesting in trees. So that's the good news, and we'll continue to monitor that trend as we go along. But looking to the future, we're also asking the question, if a chick hatches in a cell tower nest, when it reaches maturity in 5 years, is it going to be drawn to nest on a cell tower nest, or will it pick a tree nest? Is there any correlation between those two things? So we started an auxiliary banding study with the Center for Birds of Prey about 5-6 years ago. And what we're doing is, as young chicks that are coming through the clinic before they're ready to fly, we know what type of nest they came from. We put a colored leg band on their leg before they're released. And the colored leg band has a unique alphanumeric code, and it tells us what type of nest the chick came from. So if they came from a natural nest, they get a green band. If they came from a man-made structure, they get a black band. And we DNA sex those birds as well, just to see if there's any correlation between sex of the bird and what type of nest they choose at maturity. You can see how easy that green band is to read. All of our eagles that we release do also get the silver federal band, which is a 9-digit code that is almost impossible to read on a live bird, unfortunately. But the black and green bands are super easy to read. And we have been fortunate to have a number of resites. You can see on the map, it's probably a little hard to see, a number of resites within the state and then outside of Florida as eagles are migrating up the Atlantic Flyway or going to Kentucky or Ohio, wherever they might have been. So we've banded and released 105 eagles so far. And we're going into the spring, which is usually when the new juveniles start coming through the clinic. So we'll be getting a new batch to do this year. But the really fun thing for this last nesting season was the first year that the eagles that we banded in 2017, the young juvenile eagles, were reaching maturity. So we were excited to see if any of those birds settled down the nest and if we would see them nesting. And in 2023, we did actually have our first nesting auxiliary banded eagle. It was a female that was banded in Lake Nona, which is South Orlando, on a golf course. She came from a nest on a golf course. She's been hanging out with a male over in John Chestnut Park in the Tarpon Springs area, Pinellas County, West Coast, and she's back again this season with that mate. So we're hopeful this year they will actually have chicks. Last year they were kind of getting to know each other a little bit. And then this year we've had another one of our banded eagles show up at a cell tower nest, which is right in the heart of Winter Park, where I live in the Orlando area. It's a black banded bird. You can see there on the upper left corner. This bird showed up at the beginning of the season. And what was really interesting is the female that's nested there was banded just with a silver federal band. She was rescued and released and went back to that nest a few years ago, and we've been seeing her there every season. But then this bird showed up, and she's also a female. And I thought, either we got the sexing wrong on that bird, or there's something strange going on. I'm not sure what's going to happen. But the black banded bird actually eventually drove the older adult female banded eagle away. And now there's another mate there, and they are working on the nest. So knock on wood, we'll see what they do. So it's really cool to see these birds growing up and being successful, and we'll continue to look for banding and nesting reports. If you see any of these bands out there, please let me know. Some of the issues we're looking at moving, into this season and the next season, what we're seeing is, unfortunately, that as a lot of these cell towers are getting converted to 5G, they're having to change out the equipment, upgrade the equipment. And they have been removing some of the platforms that the eagles nest on. So they'll get a permit to remove the nest, but when they remove the nest, they also take the platform off. So when the eagles usually will just come back and rebuild, if the nest got removed last summer, as long as the platform is there, they're pretty stubborn. They'll just come back and rebuild the next year, and then they'll take it down again the next summer, and they just keep going. But lately they've been not adding the platforms back in once they remove the nest, which is a concern, because in some counties, a majority of the eagles are nesting on these man-made structures, and they really do rely on those cell towers. And in discussing this with some of the groups that are involved with, cell tower monitoring and ownership, they have explained that these cell towers have a very specific weight limit, and the new equipment is heavier, and they're having to reduce the weight, find ways to reduce the weight, and taking the platforms off is unfortunately one of the ways that they're finding. So been talking with U.S. Fish and Wildlife about how we can find a happy medium that allows them to meet their weight requirements, but also make sure that we are giving these eagles places to nest when they need them. So these are all the things we're looking for to the future. One other fun project that I'm hoping to get off the ground with proper funding and approvals is doing a satellite tracking study with bald eagles that come through the Center for Birds of Prey. So most of the satellite tracking studies done on eagles in Florida were done back in the 80s and 90s, very early 2000s. You know how much our landscape has changed over the last 20 years. And we really haven't done any studies on eagles looking at where they're moving in the landscape and so on in over 20 years. And so I think it would really be interesting to look and see if the findings from those studies 20 plus years ago are any different. Are eagles using the landscape any differently? What are areas that we can help protect them in? Satellite telemetry is quite expensive, unfortunately. So, it'll be depending on funding and getting the proposal through and making sure that, we can do this properly and all the tracking that goes into it. But it's exciting. I'm hoping to get that off the ground over the next year. And, if anyone's interested in supporting or knows people that might be interested in supporting, hit me up. We'll talk about ways that you can be involved in maybe sponsoring a backpack for an eagle or whatever the case might be. I think it will be really fascinating to get that data and see what the eagles are up to. So that is the majority of my talk. I think I'm doing okay on time. I have a couple of QR codes here. If you want to scan the public nest map, you can look that up there. Also, we have a new bald eagle nest reporting form for new nests. So if you actually have seen a nest, maybe you go look at the nest map and you realize that nest is not shown on the map. That means it's one we don't know about. You can use that form to document the nest. It walks you through a few questions about the nest type and where it's located. You can drop a pin on a map, you can attach a photo, and that will come to me, and then we'll follow up and get some information and assign a nest ID and put it on the map and start monitoring it. So yeah, if you have any nests that you know about that you want to check, use either of these forms to do so or the map. That would be great. So we have come to the end. Thank you for your attention. That was a lot of fast information. So if you have some good questions, let me know. If you need to reach out to me, my email is here. I'm in the office a few days and I work from home other days. So you can always reach me via email, easiest. Reach out, say hello, ask me any questions. Let me know if you have any concerns about eagles in your area. And I just appreciate, again, all my volunteers out there that are doing the amazing work. You are the heart and soul of our program. So love to all of you guys. So let me know any questions.
Hi, Shawnlei. That was wonderful. Thank you. We have a bunch of questions. And by the way, I just want to let everybody know if you have any more questions for Shawnlei, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. Before we get to the questions, however, I did omit Susan Young saying thank you to Chuck Weber for his presentation today. And so, Shawnlei, our first is just a hello, Shawnlei from Trina Thompson. I just wanted to let you know that. So questions, this is from Barry Heimlich. Can the sexes be told by the size, shape, or color of their beaks?
In general, yes, but not always. As with birds, I think that's what I love about birds. You can't always say 100% this or 100% that. There's always some individual variation. There are graphs and studies that were done that say, a female beak is this long and this wide, and the difference between one toenail and the back calyx is a certain amount if it's a female. But just with people, sometimes you have, generally with people, males are taller, females are shorter, but sometimes you have really tall women and you have short males. So that can also happen with bald eagles. So it is fairly reliable, and it's cheaper than doing DNA. So usually we do use those biometrics to determine sex of the birds in our clinic that are just regular eagles, looking at their weight and those other measurements. We do try to banding is usually done. The female gets the silver band on her right leg because females are always right. And so we try to make sure that we band them properly based on what sex we think they are. But, it's not always accurate. Sometimes we do get those odd birds that don't fit the mold or they're right in the middle. So yeah, good question.
Thank you. This was, I think, in response to when you talked about seasons that eagles breed versus Florida versus up north and elsewhere. So Elizabeth Diamond says in Seattle, they are breeding all year round, apparently. And that's what I can't verify that, but that's what she points out. Yeah.
That would be really interesting.
Yeah.
One thing I didn't mention about our eagles in Florida that and eagles in general, they only lay one clutch, or they only raise one clutch of chicks a year. So if their first clutch of eggs hatches and the chicks survive and they survive to fledge, they're done for the season. So they might be done as early as in February. If they lose that first clutch of eggs, the eggs don't hatch properly or the chicks die young. If it's early enough, they will try again, and they'll lay another clutch of eggs. But generally, they just do one a year. But that's interesting. I'll have to look into that in Seattle, that they nest all year round. I don't know. That's fascinating.
I wonder if they nest on the Space Needle out there on the needle. Anyway, so this is from Jeannie Mauser. At what age will eagles stop reproducing?
I don't think if that's ever been documented. It's so hard to document because of limitations in banding and knowing how old the bird is, and resites and telemetry. A lot of the, satellite tagging, those backpacks only work for a limited number of years. I think if you look in the literature, they probably say something like 25 or 30, but I'm always skeptical about that, just knowing how long-lived they are. And generally with animals, once their reproductive status is done, I don't want to say their purpose is done, but generally animals don't usually live much longer than their reproductive time frame. It's just the way they're wired and the way they've evolved. So I think they nest later than that, but I don't think we have any good ways of documenting that for sure.
Well, that's another longitudinal study that I guess has to be done.
Right.
So what is the time frame? This is from John Kearns. What is the time frame for reclutching, and what happens to original eggs?
I've seen a variety of things. If the first clutch doesn't hatch, sometimes they'll bury the eggs under moss. They'll bring in fresh new moss to line the nest and they'll bury them. Sometimes they'll kick them out. Sometimes in the time, maybe they take a break between clutches. If they're not at the nest consistently, other birds will come in and eat the eggs. So you see it a bit of everything, but
Wow.
I've seen there's just so much variety in eagle behavior. Some of them will reclutch right away, maybe take a break for 2 weeks, and then they'll lay eggs again. Or some of them take longer. It really depends on the pair. But that's the good news. They don't usually give up easily. And we do have, those are some of our later nesting birds. Often it's because they lost their first clutch and they're going for it one more time. We've had chicks fledge as late as July, which is always aggravating to the people that are waiting for the birds to leave so they can do their work.
Yes, gosh.
Yeah.
Thank you. So Kevin Baker asks, how many days between eggs being laid to hatching?
So usually the incubation period is 32 to 35 days.
Okay.
And they're usually laid about every day and a half. So, once they've been laid, that first egg should hatch within 35 days or so in general. Again, there is some variation, but that's usually the textbook answer.
Okay. Lorraine Marcraft asked, will the immature Florida eagles that migrate north eventually nest back in Florida when they mature?
Yeah, that's what, previous satellite tracking studies and banding studies have indicated, that they do return to Florida to nest. Florida has our resident eagles, and then we also get birds from up north that come down here for a little bit over even the winter, I think. So we've got kind of a hodgepodge of eagles doing all kinds of things, which is really fascinating. And I've had that people sometimes tell me, I swear we've got a northern eagle. He's so huge, or she's so big. But yeah, generally the common held belief is that they will return to their state to nest in Florida.
Okay, I'm glad they're returning. So Phyllis Strain asked, where is Maitland, Florida exactly? Is this the actual place to visit to find where bald eagles are sheltered or helped if they're injured?
Yes, so Maitland is a suburb of Orlando. It's just north of Orlando, kind of right off I-4. So it's really easy to get to. We do get all kinds of birds of prey, hawks, eagles, owls, vultures from the larger Central Florida area. There are other fabulous rehab facilities in Southwest Florida, Southeast Florida, Northeast Florida, West Florida. So a lot of times birds will go to those places instead, but we are one of the leaders in bald eagle rehabilitation in the area. So a lot of times they'll come to us eventually for flight training, because we have a 100-foot flight barn where we can let them exercise and make sure that they're flight capable before they go. But yeah, so just, come visit us anytime. If you're in the Orlando area, it's a nice little place to visit, kind of a slice of old Florida. a break from the touristy things. And there's plenty of great food and shopping in the area. I can give you some recommendations if you want. But yeah, you can definitely make a day of it, or a week of it. Come see us and visit all the things there are to do in Florida, in Orlando.
So I'm just curious, at your facility of the birds of prey, approximately during nesting season, how many eagles might be there?
Ooh, I'm trying to think what the most is we've ever had. It kind of, like I said, it kind of goes through cycles. We had a period at the beginning of the season, like September, October, where we probably had 6 to 7 eagles that came into the clinic.
Oh,
And then it kind of gets quiet again. And then December, January, we get more of the eagles that get struck by cars or electrocuted while they're catching food and taking it back to the nest. So I think we have 3 in the clinic right now. And then once spring hits in February on, with eagles young getting ready to fly, we get more young eagles that come through. We get 15 to 20 juvenile eagles that come through the clinic each spring. So it's kind of a interesting watching them all come, and sometimes we get overwhelmed with eagles, but that's not a bad thing to do. It's always
yeah.
great when we can help them get back out into the wild, and it's just amazing getting to see their rehabilitation process and see them take flight again.
Thank you. So Jeanette Mitchell asks, are there protections for eagle nesting areas? Can the fact that eagles are nesting in an area prevent building in that area, or at least cutting down trees and that have nests in them?
Yeah, it's illegal to cut down a tree that has a bald eagle nest in it. The tree itself is not technically protected. I know it's like splitting hairs. The tree itself is not protected, but the nest is. And if you're removing the tree, then you're removing the nest, which is illegal unless you have a federal permit. You can get a permit to remove a nest, but they don't just give those out willy-nilly. It's usually for very specific reasons. And so if you are aware of a nest, making sure that it's documented is really the first step to protecting it, because so many people do rely on the nest map to make decisions, and they might get in there and not realize there's a nest and start bulldozing trees. They're, on the books, their foraging and roosting areas are supposed to be protected, but they really don't protect those as much as they really focus on the nests themselves. With those guidelines, I mentioned the buffers for work, keeping the work outside of 330 feet. The key thing really with work near the nest is watching how the eagles are responding. It's only a disturbance if the eagles are disturbed. And that can be frustrating sometimes because some of these eagles are so used to people. We've had people building a house 100 feet away and the eagles continue nesting. And if the eagles aren't disturbed, then Florida Fish and Wildlife can't really stop the work because it's not a disturbance. So there's a lot of crazy things that go into kind of figuring out where they're at in that process. But yes, anytime you have any concerns about eagle nests being bulldozed, there is a hotline for Florida Fish and Wildlife that you can call and report disturbances or issues or removals, illegal removals. Videos and photo that you can take are always helpful. Sometimes by the time the officer shows up, the work is done or the tree is gone. So before and after is always helpful as well.
Great, thank you for that, because I know how important it is to protect the eagles. Barry Heimlich asked, what is Florida Audubon's position on eagle webcams? I know there's been some research indicating that webcams may affect nest success. So I guess that's the reason for his question.
Interesting. I've not read those, but we're kind of neutral on the eagle webcams. We recognize that they're a great educational tool, and a lot of the people that are in the EagleWatch program fell in love with eagles through eagle nest cams and really sparked a passion that led them to take action and get involved. So they do have a lot of benefits. On the other side of that, I get a number of requests each year, like for help putting one up or getting involved in putting it up. And we don't get involved in putting the cameras up at all. I can always refer people to groups that do that. There are so many other things to consider with running a bald eagle nest cam, the maintenance alone and, the cost and et cetera, but also managing all the public outcry when things aren't going right in the nest. It's nature, and sometimes what's happening in the nest is hard to watch and people get very upset. And somebody I know that manages a nest has had flaming bags of dog poo thrown at her house and death threats for not taking action. And I've gotten horrible emails myself. So it can get a little crazy out there, and people are passionate and they care. So that's good. But just being aware of all the things that goes along with having a cam, not just the cool stuff of watching the babies, but when things are sad or people are angry.
Yeah. Wow. Kevin Baker asks, any news sightings on the eaglet that fledged after being renested into PBO 35 last season?
I don't think we have gotten a recite on that bird yet. Sometimes it takes a while. There was a study done once that said the average is 7 years to recite a banded bird. We've been lucky to have some of them recited, within the first year. But it's probably I think about half of the birds we banded have been recited at some point. So that one, not yet, but I'm excited. Keep us posted. Who knows where that guy's at?
I'm amazed that out of all the nests in Florida, you could remember PBO 35. That's amazing,
Well,
Shawnlei.
well, this was we don't do this very often. A lot of times when we get the juveniles in the clinic, they're older and we just wait until they're ready to fly and we make sure they're flighted and then we release them flying. But if we get them really young, it's better to let eagles raise the chick. And so we will look for foster nests, and that's what we did with this case. We had a chick that had come out of a nest that needed a place to go, and it was healthy. And so I used EagleWatch data to find a nest that was accessible, that we could get permission to, go to from the land manager. U.S. Fish and Wildlife gave us permission to access the nest. And we use a tree climber to put the chick up in the nest with the foster family. And eagles will raise chicks that are not their own. And so we use that to our advantage. And we've done it a handful of times in my time in this role. And that was one of those cases where it just worked out that we were able to use a nest down in Palm Beach that they were able to put the chick in, and it fledged successfully there with its foster family. So yeah, and I know Kevin. I mean, it is crazy with the number of people I keep up with, but some of those stories do stick out in your brain.
Yeah, that's great. And that's a great story. Thank you for sharing it. This is in relationship to what you said about the study that you hope to do with the banding study in terms of seeing whether eagles, will return to cell towers and the success of cell towers versus trees. And so Donna D says, great question, fascinating banding study. Thank you for that. And again, I remind people, if you want to donate to help facilitate that, Shawnlei is waiting. Carol Wasowski asks, you have such expertise, Shawnlei, and what a great advocate. I can't recall if you mentioned, how long have you been doing this work?
I have been in this role since 2016, so coming up on my 8th year, I think, 7.5.
Yeah.
I came to this role with just a general love for birds and general knowledge about eagles, but I've really learned a lot on the job and from all of the great volunteers who've been so patient. And it's just such a fascinating subject, and it's really been a great opportunity to learn more about them and see their daily lives and help protect them. And so yeah, it's been a wild, crazy ride. And the program's grown like 3 times size in my time in this role. So it's been a fun challenge trying to keep up with the growth and manage the program and make sure that we're out there making a difference for the eagles.
Well, hopefully you have some assistance helping you with that growth. Jeanette Mitchell asks, please put the confidence again. I'm sorry. You did. Fredolyn C. Evans asks, thank you for the super program. Marge Barnum says, thank you, Shawnlei, a wonderful, important presentation. Mary says, do you think that, Mary Young, who is my wife, says, do you think that FWC would ever consider requiring cell tower owners who take down a platform that has had eagles on them to build an eagle nesting platform near that cell tower?
That's a good question. I mean, I kind of had this discussion with a cell tower owner just about, what can we do? And it's just, it can be so expensive to erect those structures, and there's all the liability that goes into it. There's so many other factors that you don't really think about. I think if eagles started to decline, it would probably be something that they would look at more directly. The good news is eagles are still doing well in our state. So I think hopefully they will continue to do well. We'll just have to see. But, the cell tower companies that I work with, they are all, really trying to do their best to do their business and maintain their structures while making sure the eagles are successful. And we've worked with them a number of times when a chick got stuck up in the nest or an adult got stuck, and they've climbed the tower and helped us. So they are really great partners. We'll just have to see what the future holds.
Yeah. Jeanette Mitchell asks, what is the hotline to contact if there is a construction being done that is disrupting an eagle nest?
It is 888-404-3922. Let me see if it's on my slide here. Nope, it's not on there. Sorry. I usually have that number in some of my presentations. 888 404-3922.
Okay, I just posted that in the chat, everyone. So if you want that number, it's in the chat right now.
Great.
Susan Young asks, what can we volunteers do to make your job easier?
The biggest challenge for me, especially at the end of the season, is sometimes volunteers start monitoring at the beginning of the season and then they don't consistently monitor. And at the end of the season, I realize the nest is missing data and I can't tell if the young fledged or not. So consistently entering all reports and nest visits, even if you don't see anything, is so important, because really the only way I have to know, the nest is being monitored and that you're being active is by what goes in the database. So just getting the data in a timely manner is always helpful, especially as I get those day-to-day questions about the nest status, making sure the data is in timely and efficiently. But yeah, Susan, you do a great job, so no worries there. But yeah, those are just some of the things that are more time consuming, is, following up on issues with missing data and making sure data is accurate and entered, etc.
Do you ever find yourself having to go out into the field yourself to follow up on the nest?
I have done that in my local area. I've really tried to draw that boundary and not make it something I do much beyond my area, just because my job is so all-consuming as it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do have, I monitor 2 nests myself that are in my, within a couple miles of my house. And then I have a few down south in the Kissimmee area that I visit occasionally, because they're in areas that it's hard to get volunteers to go to, and I can kind of hit them all in a little group. But yeah, I try not to do that, because it would be its own full-time job.
Yes, yes.
And I don't like driving on the road either. So if you make me drive, I'll go crazy.
So another question, could they build, this is from Kevin Baker again, could they build a wood platform which would be lighter than metal?
Possibly. And even as I was talking to the tower owner about, taking the platforms down, he said, even with the nest on the structure, that's an unknown factor with them to even try to figure out how to calculate that into their weight limit. Like, how is that impacting the weight and so on. So yeah, I'm open to any good ideas you have. Y'all put your heads together and get some smoke signals going and send me some ideas. And, I'm sure anyone would be welcome to entertain them if we've got some good ways to do that aren't going to cost them a lot of extra money, because of course that's always what they're going to come back to in the bottom line, just as any business would.
Right. Is what does it cost? One last question that I have.
Mhm.
Is there anything that we can do, the average person, the birder, the photographer, the person who cares about conservation, is there anything that you any advice, any thoughts for us that we can do to help in any way, other than perhaps monitoring a nest, perhaps when we see nests, or just in terms of advocating for eagles in general? Any closing thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's all different levels of what you can do, from the very basic, looking at your own lifestyle, like what kind of garbage are you putting out into the environment, reduce, reuse, recycle, trying to find ways to reduce the amount of plastics and other things that are going out into the environment, and reducing use of pesticides and other unnatural chemicals that are harming the waterways. And also being good ambassadors and etiquette, for yourself, if you are a photographer, making sure that you're, not jeopardizing the eagle nest family to get a good photo, or we discourage using, any sort of playback calls to try and get the eagles to look at you, because if they hear another eagle in their territory, it's extremely stressful, and that stress response is not helpful when they're trying to raise their young. It's distracting them from feeding and taking care of their baby. So just making sure that you are, being a good example when you're out taking pictures or watching the eagle nest, not getting too close, etc. And there's county commission meetings and zoning and development things that go up all the time. And if you have time to go to those and speak out about the eagle nest, I'm always happy to give you the data you need to present your information. And that's also another great way to be an advocate. So many different ways. I'm always happy if you want to ask more questions or brainstorm with me. I'll tell you what I think, and we'll find some ways for you to get involved.
Well, thank you, Shawnlei, for your presentation, for the incredible work that you do. I know that we so much value eagles, and we value the nests that are being monitored, and the fact that this is coordinated through Audubon, Florida. This is really amazing, and I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your work.
Well, thank you. It's so nice to say that, and so nice to see all your friendly faces. Sometimes when you're off in your office by yourself every day, you know, it can be easy to lose sight of the larger picture, but it is really a reminder that we are all working together to protect the species. And like I said, it's not something I can do on my own, try as I might. So I really do give all thanks to all of you all out there monitoring the nests and reporting your data and helping to protect them, and all the great, you know, Audubon chapters. You all are great supporters of our work as well, and we appreciate that enthusiasm and support and recruitment.
Well, thank you, Shawnlei Breeding, for being here tonight, and we hope to have you back again in the future. I know this is the second time you've presented for us, and I'm sure there'll be a third.
Anytime, let me know.
Okay, and if there's any more of that cheesecake, I hope you enjoy it.
One piece a day, that's my limit.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you so much and take care.
All right, have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So I just want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. It was great seeing you all. Our program team would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude for your participation and support this past year. Our presentations require a collective effort, and our dedicated volunteers have worked diligently to bring you the best programming we can. Our widely acclaimed program attracts viewers and friends from around the globe with an average of at least 130, 140 sometimes. In case you missed or want to rewatch any of our previous wonderful presentation, please visit our Audubon Everglades YouTube channel, and you can see the link in the chat. And we look forward to seeing you again next month in February, and we will update you on the presentation. It is a little unclear right now, but because we've had a slight change of schedule on that. So we will let you know, though, in the upcoming weeks who will be presenting next month. Thank you so much. Have a great evening. And again, we hope to see you next month. And once again, Happy New Year. Bye-bye, everybody.